Ah, Versailles. The name alone sounds fancy. Golden chandeliers, endless gardens, whispering fountains, gowns that sweep the marble floors, perfume in the air, everything shining like a dream. But hold your nose, because under all that sparkle, it stank. Like really stank. Welcome to 18th century France, where elegance meant drowning in powder, spraying perfume instead of washing, and pretending chamber pots in the hallway were totally normal. Let's start with Marie Antoinette. You've heard of her, the let them eat cake queen, even though she probably never said that. She was young, fashionable, and basically the influencer of her time. People copied her clothes, her hairstyles, even her walk. But here's what they didn't show in the paintings. Marie Antoinette barely bathed. Most days she just powdered over yesterday's powder. And the day before that. And so on. Because in Versailles, perfume was life. Not just to smell good, but to cover up everything else. And trust me. My name is Edward Hoffman. I've spent most of my life immersed in the world of academia, a world governed by logic, reason, and cold, hard facts. As a philosophy professor, I was known for my sharp, rational mind and my unwavering belief that science and reason were the only true guides to understanding the universe. I had no patience for superstition or what I saw as comforting fairy tales created by the weak-minded to explain the unexplainable. Religion was one of those fairy tales. It was nothing more than a tool used by the powerless to cope with their own mortality, a crutch for those who couldn't face the chaos and randomness of the world. I made it my mission to challenge beliefs, to teach my students that nothing should be taken at face value. Every idea, every theory, every belief had to be questioned, scrutinized, and dissected. I didn't just teach philosophy, I taught skepticism. I encouraged my students to reject anything that couldn't be proven, anything that couldn't stand up to the harsh scrutiny of reason and logic. God, to me, was just an idea, an invention of humankind designed to fill gaps in understanding. I had no use for it. I was a man of science, a man who believed in the power of human intellect and the incredible capacity of the mind to unlock the mysteries of the universe. My life was a routine, predictable, and grounded in reason. There was no room for irrational beliefs or abstract faith in the unknown. Everything in my life had been carefully planned, meticulously thought out, and logically structured. I didn't believe in fate, and I didn't believe in miracles. Everything that happened was the result of cause and effect, nothing more, nothing less. I had been teaching for over 20 years at a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and my reputation as a staunch atheist had preceded me. I wasn't the type to rant about my beliefs from a soapbox or engage in heated public debates. I didn't need to. My views were clear, and I made sure my students understood exactly where I stood. I didn't think less of those who believed in God, but I felt sorry for them. To me, their faith was a weakness, an escape from the harsh realities of existence. They were living in denial, and I wasn't about to indulge in that. Then, a project came up that would take me to India. It was a research assignment to study cultural evolution in tribal communities in the northeastern part of the country. I was eager for the intellectual challenge and the opportunity to immerse myself in a culture vastly different from my own. But most of all, I was looking forward to getting away from my daily routine, from the lectures, the papers, and the students who constantly questioned me. I needed a break from it all, a change of scenery. And India, with its rich history and diverse cultures, seemed like the perfect place to continue my research. I arrived in India full of confidence, my mind already racing with the possibilities. I didn't expect to encounter anything more than new ideas about culture and anthropology. I wasn't interested in religion, but I figured I would observe and document whatever belief systems I encountered. After all, that's what I was there for, to study culture. Religion was just another facet of that, something to be analyzed, not believed. And certainly not something that would challenge my worldview. As I traveled across the country, I encountered a world that was both foreign and fascinating. I observed the customs, the rituals, the practices of the people, always with the critical eye of a scholar. It was in Nagaland, a small state in northeastern India, that I found myself truly immersed in the subject of my research. Nagaland, a Christian majority state in a country otherwise known for its Hindu majority, was an interesting anomaly. Everywhere I went, I saw crosses on buildings, Bible verses painted on walls, and people gathering in groups to sing hymns. I found it amusing at first. I had always thought of India as a land of mysticism and ancient beliefs. But here, in the heart of this country, I was surrounded by the symbols of a faith that I had long dismissed. Christianity, to me, was just another superstition, no different from the gods and spirits that people in other parts of the world clung to. I had no interest in engaging with it. It was just another cultural oddity, something to observe and document. And so I did, going about my research without ever once questioning the beliefs of the people I met. To me, it was all just data, interesting but irrelevant to the work I was doing. But as I spent more time in Nagaland, something began to gnaw at me. I couldn't quite place it at first, but there was a feeling that I couldn't shake. It wasn't a religious feeling, but rather an unsettling sense that I was being confronted with something that I couldn't easily dismiss. I was being forced to confront the fact that these people, with all their beliefs and rituals, were living lives full of meaning, purpose, and community. They weren't simply misguided or deluded. They had something that seemed to bring them peace and comfort, something that I couldn't explain away with reason alone. And then, one evening, I had an encounter that would change everything. It started out like any other evening, with me sitting in my hotel room reviewing my travel plans. But this evening, as I was going over my schedule one last time, I met her. The woman who would make me question everything. She was a young Christian cleaner working at the hotel, someone I hadn't paid much attention to before. I had brushed her off as just another part of the background noise of my travels. But something in her calm demeanor caught my attention. She handed me a message, one I almost ignored. But her quiet confidence, the way she spoke about her faith, and the words she used, something about it made me stop and listen. I didn't expect it, but in that moment I felt an unfamiliar feeling, a crack in my carefully constructed worldview. It wasn't a religious epiphany, not exactly, but it was something that shook the foundation of my beliefs. That was the moment I began to realize that my understanding of the world, my belief in science, logic, and reason, wasn't the whole story. Something else was out there, and I had no idea what to do with it. I didn't know it yet, but my world was about to be turned upside down, and it all started with a conversation I almost didn't have. When I first arrived in India, I had no illusions about what I was here for. I wasn't interested in religion or spirituality. My focus was clear: cultural anthropology. I was here to study, to observe, and to document. The trip to Nagaland was just another project, another opportunity to immerse myself in a world I didn't understand. But as I settled into my hotel room, I couldn't help but notice the sights outside the window. Crosses adorned the buildings. Church signs seemed to pop up at every corner. Bible verses were painted on walls. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head at the irony of it all. Here I was, in the heart of India, a country famous for its Hindu majority, and yet I found myself surrounded by symbols of Christianity. I had been so focused on my research, on the intricacies of tribal customs and cultural evolution, that I had almost forgotten the strange contrast this place presented. It seemed almost comical to me in a way. After all, to me, religion was just another relic of the past, something the weak clung to in an attempt to make sense of the chaos of life. I had no interest in learning about their faith or engaging in their rituals. My objective was to document, not to participate. I wasn't here to become a believer or to find some hidden truth about the universe. I was just here to study. I spent the next few days immersed in interviews with tribal elders, documenting their rituals and comparing them to modern practices. I meticulously went through my notes, analyzing everything through the lens of logic and reason. Religion, in all its forms, seemed to be nothing more than a cultural curiosity. To me, the belief in a higher power was as laughable as the rest of the myths I had studied in my career. The people here might have been devout, but I saw them as just another example of how humans, throughout history, had invented gods to explain the unknown. It was on the evening of June 9th, after a long day of fieldwork, that I had my first encounter with her. I was heading back to my room, mentally exhausted, when I passed the hotel's hallway where the cleaning staff worked. I had barely noticed her before, but this time, as I walked past her, she stopped and offered a polite greeting. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a soft, calm demeanor. Her name, she said, was Maria. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, but she seemed genuinely friendly, so I nodded in acknowledgement. She offered to help me with my luggage, but I declined. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the gesture. It was just that I wasn't here to make connections. I was here to work, and my mind was already far ahead, thinking about my next steps in the project. As I started to walk past her, I noticed something strange. Her phone, tucked in her apron pocket, was playing something loudly enough for me to hear. The voice was faint but distinct, a German accent speaking in English. I could catch a few words, but they sounded oddly familiar. I stopped in my tracks when I realized what I was hearing. Bible verses. My immediate instinct was irritation. I had no time for religious talk, especially in the context of a research trip. I wasn't here for that. I didn't want to be rude, but I didn't want to engage either. I asked her to turn it down, and she complied, but not before glancing at me with a look that seemed almost apologetic. "Sorry," she said, but her voice didn't hold the nervousness I had expected. Instead, it was calm, almost serene, and there was an odd stillness about her presence. She finished her task, handing me my freshly pressed suit, but the words I had overheard lingered in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow been drawn into something I didn't want to be a part of. I should have just moved on, left it at that, and focused on my plans for the next day. But something about that brief exchange stayed with me. Perhaps it was the strange juxtaposition of her soft confidence and the way her voice had seemed to fill the air. Or maybe it was the fact that even as I stood there, dismissing her words as nonsense, I couldn't help but feel challenged. Here I was, in a place where religion was everywhere, and I felt this inexplicable sense of discomfort, as if the ground beneath me was shifting. I brushed it off. She was just a hotel cleaner, and I was here for something much bigger. But as I headed to my room, I couldn't ignore the unease that was creeping into my thoughts. I knew I had been dismissive of her, but now I started to wonder why I had reacted the way I did. What was it about her calmness, her unwavering certainty in her faith, that had stirred something inside me? I wasn't used to people challenging my worldview, especially not so quietly, so effortlessly. But then, as I lay in bed that night, ready to drift off to sleep, I found my thoughts drifting back to that brief encounter. The words from the phone played back in my mind. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself wondering what kind of person could believe in something so strongly, something so steadfast. The idea of a constant, unchanging presence seemed alien to me. My world was built on flux, on change, on the undeniable truths of science and reason. But somehow, Maria's quiet faith made me question my own certainty. I dismissed it quickly. I was a man of logic, not faith. But still, as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, was there something more to this place, to this moment, than I was willing to admit? And little did I know that this small encounter, this fleeting moment of doubt, would set into motion a chain of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. The morning of June 10th arrived with a sense of urgency. I had meticulously planned my trip, every detail accounted for, every connection made with military precision. I had checked and double-checked my train schedule, ensuring I would have enough time to catch my flight out of Nagaland. The journey from Demopere to the next station was the first step in what was supposed to be a flawless travel day. The train was leaving at 6:15 a.m., and I had plenty of time to get there. Everything was going to plan. I sat at the small desk in my hotel room, reviewing the details again just to be sure. I laid out my tickets, checked the flight details, and went through the itinerary once more. My passport was neatly tucked inside its leather folder, and the train tickets sat in front of me, ready for the trip. I had built in extra time, accounted for delays, and even had some buffer hours. I felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that everything was organized down to the last detail. It was how I lived my life. Order, logic, control. It wasn't just about traveling. It was about showing the world that planning could prevent chaos. I stood up, double-checking the time. It was a little after 5 a.m. I felt confident, as I always did before embarking on a well-planned journey. I had no doubt that everything would unfold as I had envisioned. My mind was already on the next steps. Getting the taxi to the station, ensuring that the train would be on time, and getting to the airport without any hitches. I could already imagine the smooth transition from one leg of my journey to the next. But as I checked the time again, a nagging feeling crept over me. It was faint at first, barely noticeable. But as I made my way out of the room, it lingered, making me uneasy. I didn't give it much thought at the time. After all, nothing ever went wrong in my carefully laid plans. Nothing ever went wrong when you followed the rules and respected the system. And I followed the rules, religiously. I had done it all before, countless times, and I had never failed. Today would be no different. But as I walked down the narrow corridor of the hotel, passing the small lobby and heading toward the front desk, that feeling persisted, almost as if the universe were pushing back against my rigid schedule. I ignored it. I had to. I was on a mission. The taxi would be waiting, and the train would depart on time. At the front desk, I made a quick call for checkout and asked for my suit, still pressed and folded, to be brought to my room. Time was running short. I had planned for this moment down to the minute, but as I waited for the suit to arrive, I felt my impatience start to build. It was nothing I wasn't used to. After all, this was a routine for me. But the stillness in the air felt different now, as if the universe was subtly reminding me of the fragile balance of my plans. The irony was that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was out of sync with the world. I had lived for control, but something in the air was telling me that I wasn't in control at all. The suit arrived a few minutes later, but as I grabbed the neatly pressed garment from the young hotel worker, I glanced at the clock and saw that the minutes were slipping away faster than I had anticipated. There was no more time to waste. I had to hurry. I dashed out of my room, barely taking a moment to reflect on the odd sensation that had been growing inside me since the night before. As I reached the street and hailed a taxi, the doubt I had tried to push aside returned with a vengeance. The taxi driver sped through the streets, and I watched the clock as it ticked closer to 6 a.m. In my mind, I could see everything unfolding as planned. But the doubt, like an unwelcome guest, refused to leave. Why was I so focused on being right? Why did I care so much about proving my point to Maria, the young woman who had briefly interrupted my thoughts the day before? Was I really so confident that I could control everything, even the universe's timing? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. This wasn't about Maria or anything related to our conversation. This was about travel, about reaching the train station on time, about proving that my methodical approach to life was flawless. I arrived at the station with minutes to spare, or so I thought. As I rushed toward the platform, the sight of the train pulling away from the station sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The train should have waited. It should have been there, waiting for me, just as everything else in my life always had been. But it wasn't. I stood frozen for a moment, watching the train's lights fade into the distance, and a wave of frustration and disbelief washed over me. How could this happen? How could I miss the train I had so carefully calculated my arrival for? For the first time in my life, I felt powerless. My carefully laid plans had crumbled in an instant. My flawless system, my impeccable timing had failed me. I had no explanation, no logical reason for it. It was a fluke, a mistake, a random event. That's what I told myself. But even as I stood there staring at the empty tracks, I couldn't shake the growing realization that something else was at play here, something I didn't understand. The train was gone, and I was left standing in the cold morning air, with nothing but a ruined schedule and a sense of confusion that I couldn't shake. I looked at my phone, frantically searching for the next available train, but the options were limited. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the lost time. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I had lost control in a way that science and logic couldn't explain. I arrived at the airport, my heart pounding in my chest. I was still reeling from the morning's chaos, the missed train, the last-minute scramble to find another one, the overwhelming sense of losing control. I tried to shake off the frustration, but it lingered. I was tired, anxious, and already feeling the pressure of time. My flight to London was the only thing that kept me moving forward, the last leg of this exhausting journey, and I couldn't afford to miss it. I rushed through the airport, my eyes glued to the clock as I navigated through the crowds of travelers. The thought of missing this flight after everything that had already gone wrong was unbearable. I kept checking my watch, hoping the minutes would slow down just enough for me to make it to the gate. The last thing I wanted was to face another setback, another failed attempt at keeping my life in order. I finally made it to the terminal, only to be greeted by the sight of a large screen displaying breaking news. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Air India Flight 171 crashes after takeoff. All passengers confirmed dead. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen, staring at the screen as the news anchor spoke in rapid, urgent tones. The flight I was supposed to be on, the flight I had just missed by 15 minutes, had crashed. The world seemed to tilt around me, and the sound of the terminal became a dull hum in the background. I tried to process what I had just read, but my mind refused to make sense of it. I had been so close to being on that plane, to being part of that tragedy. The irony was unbearable. I had missed my flight, but not because of any grand plan or miraculous intervention. Just a few minutes, a small delay, an ordinary mistake. Yet here I was, standing in the airport, watching the aftermath of a disaster that should have been mine. The weight of it all crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I wasn't just shaken by the tragedy itself, but by the realization that I'd come so close to being one of its victims. My mind raced with questions, but none of them made sense. How could something so random, so insignificant as a missed train, lead to something so monumental? What was I supposed to make of this? I had always believed that the universe operated on logic, on reason. Yet here I was, staring at the screen, unable to find any logical explanation for what had just happened. And then, as if from nowhere, the words from Maria came rushing back to me. Jesus saved me and my family. I had dismissed them when she spoke them, laughed them off as the naive ramblings of someone who needed to believe in something. But now, in the face of this unexpected turn of events, those words echoed in my mind with an intensity I couldn't ignore. What if there was something to what she had said? I couldn't explain the timing of it, the strange coincidence of me missing that flight. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt an unsettling sense that there was something more at play here. I sank into a chair in the terminal, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. My mind kept returning to the accident, to the image of the plane crashing, the passengers on board. I could have been one of them. I should have been one of them. But I wasn't. And that fact weighed heavily on me. I had no rational explanation for why I was still sitting here, alive, when so many others weren't. It didn't make sense. As I sat there, I felt a deep unease settle in my chest. I had always prided myself on my ability to explain the world through science, through logic. I had built my entire life on the idea that everything had a reason, that every outcome was the result of cause and effect. But this didn't fit. There was no logical explanation for why I had missed that flight, why I had been spared from something that should have claimed my life. I tried to push it aside, to dismiss it as a coincidence, but the thought kept nagging at me. What if it wasn't? My thoughts drifted back to Maria and her calm, unwavering faith. Could it be that she had known something I didn't? Could it be that there was more to the world than I had ever been willing to admit? The very idea made me feel uneasy, as if I were stepping into territory I didn't understand. I had spent my life ridiculing such beliefs, laughing at the idea that a higher power could intervene in the natural order of things. But now, as I sat there, grappling with the reality of what had just happened, I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was something more to life than I had ever considered. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to clear my thoughts. I wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. I couldn't bring myself to believe that some divine force had intervened to save me. That would mean acknowledging something I had spent years rejecting. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the events of the last few hours had shaken me to my core. I wasn't the man I had been when I arrived in India. Something had changed. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the bustling airport. The world continued on, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded in my life. But inside, something was different. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I could feel it. There was a crack in the foundation of everything I had believed. I wasn't sure where it would lead or what it meant, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The events of the day, the near miss with death, the strange sense of being spared had planted a seed in my mind that I couldn't uproot. And for the first time in my life, I found myself asking questions I had never considered before. What if Maria was right? What if there was more to this world than I had ever allowed myself to see? I returned to my hotel room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The quiet hum of the air conditioner in the corner did little to soothe the turmoil inside me. I had been so sure of myself, so certain that the world operated strictly according to the laws of logic and reason. But now, after everything that had transpired, I found myself questioning everything. The events of the day, the near miss with the crash, the sudden rush of gratitude and fear, none of it fit into the neat logical framework I had built my life around. I collapsed onto the bed, my eyes staring blankly at the television screen. The news channels were still covering the aftermath of the crash. The wreckage was shown in grainy footage, the flames still burning in the background, the fire trucks and emergency crews swarming the area. I could hear the steady stream of updates as the reporters spoke of the death toll, of the families left behind, of the heroic efforts of the first responders. And then, just as my mind was starting to shut down, the anchor's voice cut through the noise. Flight 171 had 242 passengers on board. All are presumed dead. The cause of the crash is still under investigation. My stomach twisted into knots. I had been so close to being one of those passengers. I should have been on that flight, seated in my assigned seat, 14A, waiting for takeoff. But instead, I was here, alone in this hotel room, still processing the fact that I had missed it by mere minutes. The thought kept cycling in my head. How close I had come to losing everything, to being swallowed up by that tragic event. The weight of it hit me harder than I had expected. I had never truly appreciated how fragile life was, how easily everything could be taken away. There had always been a comforting certainty in my beliefs, a sense that life was governed by clear cause and effect. But now, that certainty felt hollow. I had never believed in fate or in divine intervention. But what else could explain what had happened? Was it simply a coincidence, or was there something more at play here? I shut my eyes and leaned back against the headboard, trying to clear my mind. But the image of the crash kept playing in my head, and I couldn't escape the thought that I had narrowly avoided the same fate. The idea of it, the randomness of it all, was almost unbearable. How had I gotten so lucky? What had saved me? And then, in the silence of the room, I heard her words again, the words Maria had spoken to me that morning. Jesus saved me and my family. I had laughed them off at the time, dismissing them as just another piece of religious nonsense. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the day's events, those words resonated in a way they never had before. I found myself thinking about Maria, about her calm demeanor, her unshakable faith, and how, in the midst of my arrogance, I had dismissed her beliefs so easily. Could she have been right? Was there something to what she had said? I had always mocked the idea of a higher power, of divine intervention, of miracles. But now, as I sat there, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't deny the possibility that something beyond my understanding had played a role in saving me. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling the weight of my doubts settle in. My entire life had been built on the foundation of reason and logic, on the idea that everything could be explained by science, by facts, by evidence. But now, all of that felt insufficient. I had no logical explanation for what had happened. The coincidence of it all was too much for me to ignore. How could I explain the series of events that had led me to miss that flight? The missed train, the rushed taxi ride, the last-minute delays? It all seemed too improbable, too perfectly timed to be just chance. The longer I sat with these thoughts, the more I began to feel that I was standing at a crossroads. I couldn't ignore the growing sense that there was something I was missing, something bigger than myself that I had always dismissed. But the thought of embracing something I had spent my life rejecting, faith, religion, divine intervention, felt like a betrayal of everything I had worked so hard to build. It was as if I were admitting that I had been wrong, that the very foundation of my existence had been flawed. I tried to distract myself, picking up my phone and scrolling aimlessly through emails. But my mind kept drifting back to Maria and her unwavering belief. I thought about how, despite my dismissive attitude, she had never wavered in her faith. She had spoken with such conviction, such certainty, that it made me wonder if there was something I couldn't see, something I had been blind to all these years. I closed my eyes, trying to silence the growing conflict inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the nagging question that had settled in my mind. What if there was more to this world than I had ever believed? What if all of the evidence, all of the science, all of the facts didn't account for everything? What if there was a higher power, a force beyond our understanding, that truly influenced the course of our lives? I couldn't answer that question. Not yet. I didn't know what I believed anymore. The certainty I had once held so tightly to had slipped away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I had spent my life building walls around myself, rejecting anything that didn't fit into my rigid worldview. But now, those walls seemed flimsy, as though they could crumble with the slightest push. I leaned back against the bed, my mind racing. I wasn't ready to accept what was happening to me, to acknowledge the possibility that I might have been wrong all these years. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The events of the past few days had cracked open my understanding of the world, and I wasn't sure what would fill the space left behind. For the first time in my life, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that perhaps that was the first step toward understanding something much greater than myself. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at the desk again, the weight of everything that had happened still heavy in my mind. The world outside seemed to carry on as usual, indifferent to the internal turmoil that I had been wrestling with since the day I missed that flight. I opened the book in front of me, trying to focus on something familiar, something that had always brought me comfort. But today, the words on the pages seemed distant, irrelevant, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. The question that had been nagging at me for days now burned in the back of my mind. What if faith wasn't just an illusion? What if there was more to life than the cold logic and reason I had spent my entire existence clinging to? The more I tried to ignore it, the more the thought took hold of me. The events of the past few days, my narrow escape, the crash, Maria's words, had shattered something inside me. Something I had never been willing to question before. I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't have all the pieces, and I certainly didn't have a neat, logical explanation for what had happened. But I couldn't deny that something had changed in me. Something had shifted, and I could no longer view the world through the same lens I once did. I had always believed in the power of science, of facts, of tangible proof. But now, in the face of what I had experienced, that belief felt incomplete. There was a part of me that wanted to reject the idea outright, to dismiss it as a coincidence, as a fluke. I had built my entire life around the idea that everything was explainable, that the universe operated on predictable rules. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were things in this world, things that had happened to me, that defied explanation. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. I couldn't say for sure if I'd been spared by divine intervention, but I knew one thing. I was alive, and that fact was not lost on me. I couldn't just continue pretending that nothing had changed, that I could go back to the way I had been before. I had to face the truth, however uncomfortable it was. There were forces at play in the world that I didn't understand, things I had dismissed as superstition for far too long. But now, I wasn't so sure. I picked up my phone, my hand trembling slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. Maria's name was near the top. I had thought about calling her before, but something had always held me back. What would I say? How could I explain what was happening inside me? But now, it seemed like the only way to make sense of it all. Maybe, just maybe, talking to her, hearing her perspective, could give me the clarity I needed. As I dialed the number, my mind raced. I didn't know what I was looking for, what I hoped to hear, but I had to try. I had to understand what had happened, what had led me to this point of confusion and doubt. I needed to find some kind of resolution, some way to reconcile the man I had been with the person I was becoming, and I couldn't do that on my own. While waiting for the call to connect, I looked out the window, my gaze wandering to the sky. It was a clear morning, the sun rising slowly over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city. It was the kind of view that had once been a simple backdrop to my life, something I had taken for granted. But now it felt different. I felt different. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to have all the answers. I didn't need to explain everything away with logic and reason. Maybe that's what I had been searching for all along, a sense of peace with the unknown. The idea that there were things in this world that couldn't be neatly categorized or explained. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't an answer, but it was a step towards something new, something I hadn't been willing to consider before. I wasn't ready to call it faith, but I was ready to acknowledge that not everything could be explained. Some things were simply beyond our understanding, and maybe that was okay. The phone clicked, and Maria's voice came through the speaker. I felt a wave of uncertainty, but also a strange sense of relief. This was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, but something I knew would change me forever. And for the first time in a long time, I felt open to the possibility that there was more to this world than I had ever believed. As I spoke with Maria, the world outside continued on, unaware of the quiet transformation that was unfolding inside me. I still didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure where this path would lead. But for the first time in my life, I was willing to ask the questions, to seek the answers that I had spent so long avoiding. I didn't have to have it all figured out right now. The journey itself was enough.